continue. Today I was planning to talk to you about artificial insemination through particularly one case, Korolyov versus against Russia, and some other cases very much related to this. But first of all, happy Students' Day.
Thank you.
Are there Tatyanas today here? No? These are some pictures I took at Cambridge. This is the law faculty underneath the tables. And this is the banks of the Cam River. So they go to punt on these boats. It's very, very nice memories. Yesterday, I thought you were all medical students. Do you mind if I ask you who you are today? Could you grab your phone and just, as you did yesterday, and you can tell me what you're studying. It may be, you may have two professions or two educations, just to know your background. I will also introduce myself. Sorry? You can enter just one word, like who you are, what's your education, or what's your profession, or you can enter 2 or 3.
Oh, thank you.
Submit. Do you know if we can switch off this light?
I'm afraid not.
Sir?
I'm afraid not.
No? Can you actually see slides okay?
Yes.
Okay. And you can see the results. Who are you? Okay. Bioengineers. Bioengineer. Разжигает. Petroleum factory. Molecular biologist. Science, data science, theoretical physics, cancer research, lawyer, physicist. Oh, somebody else. East. What is it? East.
Informational.
Sorry?
Informational systems and technology.
At least. Okay. Well, thank you for introducing yourself. Nice to meet you. Yes. So, artificial insemination. Korolyov's case. So everything I'm going to share today will be circling around this case, Korolyov's case. But there are a number of people who are involved in the litigation I'm going to talk today. And this is a picture of Veronika Korolyova, filmed by Channel 5 on one of her litigation efforts. Is this movie familiar to you? 10 years without the right to write. 10 лет без права переписки. Have you heard about this movie? Well, it's actually a good Russian movie, and it tells you about what was going on in the 30s and 40s particularly in the 30s, 1937, when people would be arrested. And then the family will hear that this person, father or mother, was arrested and charged and convicted for usually предательство, something else. And the sentence is 10 years of imprisonment without the right to contact the family, to write to a family. But that's usually meant that this person was killed, that this person was sentenced to capital punishment and was executed. Unfortunately, until 2016, particularly until the 15th of November 2016, a similar rule existed in the Russian legislation. In the Punishment Enforcement Code, in Russian it's Уголовно-исполнительный Codex. Basically, this rule tells that a person who is convicted to life sentence, basically who is serving his entire life, does not have a right to have conjugal meetings with the member of their families. Conjugal meeting is basically, there are two types of meetings that the lifers, and it's the people who serve life sentence, has the right to. So first meetings, it's twice a year, just a meeting for 4 hours of no more than 2 or 3 members of your family. But the meeting is going through the window and the bar. So there is no possibility of touching. And it's always under the supervision of the guard. Conjugal meeting is a meeting where a prisoner can meet a member of their family in a closed environment, in a dormitory room, or actually kind of a flat with a kitchen, where they can have an intimacy, and it's not supervised by any guards. So it used to be like this until 2 years ago, that those who are convicted for life does not have a right to conjugal meetings, does not have a right to this intimacy meetings, which actually can last for 3 days. This rule appeared in 1997. Well, first of all, until 1996, there were no life prisoners in the Soviet Union, in Russia, because there was a capital punishment. People who used to be executed if they were sentenced to capital punishment. And this rule existed until Russia entered the Council of Europe, the organization which I was talking about yesterday. And the condition of Russia being member of the Council of Europe was that Russia will cancel the capital punishment. Unfortunately, still, capital punishment exists on the books. It exists in the criminal code, penal code. There are some crimes which are punishable by capital punishment, but there is a moratorium on carrying out executions. So since 1996, no prisoners were executed, no prisoners who were sentenced to capital punishment. when in 1997 a new punishment enforcement code, Исполнительный кодекс был принят, those who were convicted to capital punishment, their sentence was substituted to the life sentence. And initially, for the first year or two, those criminals, lifers, they had a right to 2 conjugal meetings per year. But then, in 1997, the new rule was introduced, a special regime was placed on those people, and they were denied any right on conjugal meetings for the first 10 years of serving their sentence. But these 10 years could, as a rule, were extended to even up to 15 years. The reason is that these 10 years were counted not from the moment the people were arrested, but from the moment these people were sentenced. So when the judgment took place. And they were moved from SIZO, the pre-trial detention center, to actual prison or correctional colony. So from the moment this person arrives at the correctional colony, this clock start to tick, 10 years start to count. Not from the moment it was arrested, but between this time it could be 5 years or even more. So just a little bit of a background of this rule. The problem is also that if a lifer is not allowed to have conjugal meetings, then all the members of their families are also punished. They're punished by being prevented from seeing their family members. And I wanted to ask you to tell me your attitude towards this statement that lifers and their wives, their family members as well, may be limited in the possibility of having a child, may be limited in the possibility of having conjugal meetings. So, because you're convicted because of the very bad crime, because you're convicted for life, your family members also should bear some consequences, like no meetings, no conjugal meetings, and therefore no possibility to conceive a child. If you can also scan, maybe those who are in the back, you can scan the picture on the back. It's easier. So you can vote agree with this statement or disagree. And we easy can look into the results. Disagree. So very close, right? 44, 55, 6%. Sorry? So everybody voted. Okay, so let's remember this number for now and continue. first time we heard about this issue, problem, in 2004, when the Harkins family approached us with the problem that they didn't have a right to conjugal meetings. The Harkin was convicted for 2 murders of policemen, for robbery, and sentenced to life. His wife, back then I think they were 28, 30 years old. And his wife wanted to have a child from him, despite the fact that what's going to happen in the future, she will probably never will see his husband free. So, and they sent a request to the prison. They were rejected. Their request was rejected. They simply requested to have a conjugal meeting, so we have a couple of days together so they can conceive a child. And the refusal was based on the ground of these 2 articles that I mentioned before, 125-27 of the Punishment Enforcement Code. Back then, it was just a little bit of legal details. Right now, it's not possible to challenge the law right way to the Constitutional Court. You have to go through all the courts, like District Appeal Court, Cassations, and then go to the Constitutional Court. But back then, it was possible. So our lawyer took this case right to the Constitutional Court. And the Constitutional Court made a decision in 2005 that, of course, it's a long decision, but the core of this judgment is that this prisoner may be limited in the possibility of having a child. This judgment was, we argued the case on behalf of his wife and himself. But the Constitutional Court only reflected that he doesn't have a right. He is prevented meetings. There was nothing about his wife. And the core conclusion is, it's not only about meetings, he can also limit it in the possibility of having a child. Unfortunately, European Court of Human Rights rejected the application. After the Constitutional Court, they went to the European Court of Human Rights. But it's also some legal details. Although back then, in 2004, in Russia, it was possible to jump right from the rejection of the colony to the Constitutional Court without going through all the smaller courts. When you apply to the European Court, you have to exhaust all the domestic remedies. You have to go through all the national courts. So for this reason, European Court rejected the application. And then around the same time, Andrei Horoshenko, he also claimed the right to conjugal meetings, but not in order to conceive a child, but in order to see the members of their family, his father, his mother, and his son, back then very young. He didn't ask for conjugal meetings in order to conceive a child, because by the time he was convicted, his family fell apart. He divorced his wife. So he also requested to have a conjugal meeting, and his request was refused on the same ground. He went to the Constitutional Court. It rejected. The decision was almost similar to what the Harkins were told, and then he applied to the European Court of Human Rights. We'll come back to this European Court situation. Fortunately, unlike in the Harkins case, his application was accepted by the European Court. It's actually very interesting. Just to give you a little bit of background how it works. I mean, European Court of Human Rights usually that's the rule. Your application is received by by lawyers of the Secretariat of the Court. So no judge touched the case the first time, and it's a lot of application. Once every year, it's like 15,000 just coming from Russia, and they're being filtered by lawyers of different education, different knowledge, different smartness, different tiredness, or all these subjective elements are involved. And the case of the Harkin was thrown out, inadmissible, and you can't appeal it. It's it, it's final decision. But for some reason, the same application of the Harkin, which arrived to the European Court around the same time, 2005, were not thrown out. And I happen to know the person who considered the application of Harshenko. He said that his application was on the shelves for a number of years. I was asked to continue going through the cases. I took this folder, and he decided that this claim, this application has a ground. It has to be considered by the European Court. And he wrote a positive conclusion memo on the case and give it to the judges. And unlike the Harkin case, it wasn't even just considered by the European Court, by regular chamber. Usually case is considered by 7 judges. 3, 7, and by 17 judges. But the chamber consisted of 7 judges thought that this case is so important and so interesting, and it changes some principles of the case law of the European Court, that it gave up the jurisdiction and sent this case to the Grand Chamber, which consisted of 17 judges. So just to give you a contrast, that for some reason similar cases went through different ways into the Bean and into the Grand Chamber of the European Court, the highest instance. Excuse me, just be careful, there's a camera behind you. Okay, we come back to Harshenko case, Korolyov's case, the main case. So we lost this case in 2005, and then continue looking for some similar stories, similar families who would like to continue and challenge this rule. And then in 2013, Veronika Korolyova approached us. So her case is this one. Her husband, Nikolai Korolyov, was convicted, sentenced to life in May 2008. She married him in 2009, a year after, when he was sent to correctional colony. This is actually a picture of the wedding ceremony in the correctional colony. And they first met in 2017 after they won the case at the Constitutional Court. Nikolai Korolyov, you may maybe heard of the explosion at the Cherkizovsky Rynek in 2006. So according to the sentence, he was a mastermind of this explosion. So he was convicted for this crime. So when she approached us, we considered what is possible to do. We took into account our experience with the Harkins case. If we go to the Constitutional Court with the same issue, asking for conjugal meetings, we're going to get the same answer, right? And this time we suggested and decided to go through all the courts with a different question. Yes? Oh, sorry. It's abbreviation of artificial insemination. And further, I will be referring to art as an artificial insemination. So we suggested not to challenge the lack of possibility of to have conjugal meetings, but to challenge, to ask for prison authorities to allow the family to conceive a child artificially. So basically that's actually the right question to ask, because their goal is not just to have a meeting, a private meeting. Is their goal not just to have sex, but their goal is to conceive a child. That's the primary goal. And if you have a conjugal meeting, even twice a year, it's very unlikely, without regular intercourse, it's very unlikely that they will be able to conceive a child. And no prison authority will care about the periods of the woman. They will just appoint a date for conjugal meeting, and they don't care about whether it's a good time for a woman to conceive. So that's why we decided to request the correctional colony not to have a conjugal meeting, but to assist with artificial insemination process. That's the point. Assist, not to organize, not to cover all the expenses connected with artificial insemination, but assist. So before filing a lawsuit, there were a number of letters sent to different authorities, different specialized clinic, and we found the following. So Veronika Koroleva, as he is a free person, not convicted for anything, she works, she decided she will cover all the expenses associated with art. We found out that it's not possible to carry out artificial insemination within the prison. There's just no facilities. It's not possible to carry out this process anywhere close to the prison. So the prison, I didn't mention this, is in Poselok Harkins, in the Ямало-Ненецкий автономный округ. It's about, if you go by train from Moscow, it's about 2 days. If you fly, it's maybe 1 day. Another problem is that with the biological material, with the sperm, if you want to bring it in a container, you have only up to 3 actually, but better 1 hour of time to bring into a specialized clinic and to freeze it. There's a special word for this. Anyway, I will say to freeze it. But because it's not possible to carry out this process in the prison or anywhere near the place of detention, you have to carry out this container from Ямало-Ненецкий автономный округ to somewhere where the clinic is situated. Moscow, Yekaterinburg, St. Petersburg. The problem is no clinic has special equipment to freeze the sperm in a special container and then safely bring it to the place where it can be used. So the only possibility was to bring the prisoner from this faraway region to Moscow or Yekaterinburg, and then have his sperm in a container and quickly, within an hour, to be brought to a clinic and then to be frozen permanently, right? And to be used in the future. And we asked the colony to assist in this way, to bring the prisoner to Moscow or to Yekaterinburg. Unfortunately, prison refused, and all other prison authorities of the region and of the Russian Federation refused to carry out this assistance, simply saying that this obligation, we don't have this obligation, it's not in the code, it's not in any instructions that we have. So, get lost, forget about this. So that's this refusal. So the only cost that the prison would have carried out was to bring this person to Moscow in Yekaterinburg. They said, we can't do this, but in practice, he was actually transferred to Moscow one more time because of his allegedly involvement. Actually, he was convicted for this second crime. So in order to participate in a second hearing on another case, he was brought from prison to Moscow. So they have this possibility, of course. So we challenged this rejection in the district court, in the Babushkin district court. We asked the court to recognize this rejection illegal and force the correctional colony to carry out this assistance. Like in Sablina case, the only legal argument that we had was based on the Article 8 of the European Convention. All the Russian legislation was against us. Basically, Russian legislation didn't have anything apart from this Article 127, 125 of the Correctional Code. The only tool that we had was Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. And the case of Dixon versus United Kingdom. Dixon versus United Kingdom interpreted Article 8 in terms of whether prisoners and their family members has a right to artificial insemination. Not to conjugal meetings, but to artificial insemination. This case didn't discuss conjugal meetings. So we went to the court with this argument. Like in Sablina case, you remember in Sablina case there was a case of two Latvian cases. I said they were very much similar to what happened to Sablina. This is the same situation. If you remove the name Dixon and substitute it with Korolev, and then UK you substitute with Russia, that's exactly the same case. Similar situation, even worse, because the wife and the husband in this case were both convicted criminals. They were all serving their sentences in the prison. Husband was lifer, and his wife was convicted for something for a smaller term. They get to know each other through letters and decided to have a child. And this is Veronica going through different. This is colony, you see, ИК, исправительная колония номер 18, Полярная сова in This is the Supreme Court that we will bring in final appeals. This is the Babushkin District Court. This is just thinking what to do.
Необычное дело интимного
And sorry, I will just put a short video, which was filmed by Channel 5 on this case and how we filed the first application.
Необычное дело интимного характера начал рассматривать Бабушкинский суд Москвы. 34-летняя женщина требует от Федеральной службы исполнения наказаний дать ей возможность забеременеть от своего супруга. Сейчас он отбывает пожизненный срок за терроризм в колонии Ямало-Ненецкого автономного округа. По закону, таким осужденным длительное свидание с родными предоставляется лишь спустя первые 10 лет заключения. Ждать любящая женщина не хочет и говорит, что согласна даже на искусственное оплодотворение. Андрей Ильев оценил драматизм судебных страстей.
Забеременеть, естественно, нельзя искусственно. Вопрос, где здесь запятую поставить, заставил Веронику Королеву искать ответ в суде. Супруга пожизненно заключенного захотела от своего мужа ребенка. Процесс интимный превратился в судебный.
Мы с 2009 года просили разрешить нам длительное свидание, чтобы зачать ребенка, но нам все время отказывали, ссылались, что не положено. А в этом году мы получили бумажку из СИН России, то, что нам продлевают условия строгие, и длительные свидания не будут разрешены до 2019 года, ориентировочно.
В 2019-м супругам будет под 40. Вероника говорит, совсем не вариант для зачатия. Надежда остается лишь на искусственное оплодотворение. Но как это сделать в условиях тюремной камеры?
В исправительной колонии УФСИН России по Ямало-Ненецкому автономному округу нет необходимого оборудования и помещения для проведения указанных медицинских анализов, а также нет условий выноса биологического материала из учреждения.
Ответ УФСИН супругам оказался непонятен. Вероника попросила этапировать ее мужа в другую колонию с подходящими условиями и даже согласилась взять на себя затраты. Но и здесь ей отказали.
Когда заключенный решил завести семью, когда заключенный решил завести ребенка, это часть возвращения в общество, часть осознания того, что, может быть, раньше я не так все это делал, понимал, совершил ошибку, а сейчас он готов исправиться.
Николай Королев приговорен к пожизненному лишению свободы. В 2006 году вместе с сообщниками он произвел взрыв на Черкизовском рынке в Москве. Теракт унес жизни 14 человек. Недавно Королев записал видеообращение.
Это ужасное чувство, когда ты осознаешь, что здесь тебе предстоит прожить еще долго. Скорее всего, умереть.
Осужденный преступник также выступил в поддержку жены и попросил УФСИН помочь им зачать ребенка.
Я думаю, то, что нам обоим будет даже полегче жить. Зная то, что у нас есть продолжение, и я здесь не одна одинока, а то, что со мной рядом часть мужа, А ребенок будет со мной на свидание ездить, ребенок будет писать папе письма.
Историей Королевых уже заинтересовались специалисты по репродуктивным технологиям.
С медицинской точки зрения, главное для процесса ЭКО или искусственного оплодотворения, как у принято, это чтобы сперма производителя, или, проще говоря, донора, то есть дошла до реципиента, в данном случае женщины. То есть в пределах 10 часов, я говорю, то есть можно это делать с нативной спермой, то есть не замораживая.
Но передать пробирку из камеры в больницу без разрешения УФСИН невозможно, потому вариант с этапированием заключенного и его супруги кажется наиболее реальным. Если потребуется, Вероника намерена обратиться в Европейский суд, тем более, что случаи положительного решения в пользу заключенных там уже были. Первая встреча в суде лишь начало долгого и длительного процесса. Чем он закончится и каков будет результат, пока непонятно. Сама Вероника Королева, впрочем, рассчитывает только на положительный исход и очень верит, что все получится. Андрей Ильев, Игорь Чернышов, Дмитрий Леонов и Евгений Смеха. Место происшествия.
This is a chart of all the litigation efforts. So this is the Harkins application to the Constitutional Court. This is the Harkins at the ECHR. This is where Koroleva appealed to the Republican District Court. Actually, there were two applicants, herself and her husband. And then there was an appeal to Moscow City Court, and there was an appeal to Presidium of Moscow Court, Supreme Court, and then again to the Constitutional Court, and then we appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, and then back to the Babushkin District Court. I will explain why. Then Moscow City Court, and then back to the Constitutional Court where we won the case. And now the case is in the ECHR, in the European Court. And I also will explain why, although winning the case at the Constitutional Court, we still won something from the European judges. And apart from this, there were another 3 cases which we litigated in parallel. We took into account the experience with the Harkins. After losing the cases, the family has fallen apart. They divorced, and actually the Harkin himself was killed 2 years ago in the prison. But if we're talking about strategic litigation is where a lawyer or team of lawyers takes the case not in order just to help Veronika Koroleva or somebody else, Andrei Horoshenko, but the goal is to change the legislation which affects many people, not just lifers. There are only 1,800 lifers in Russia, but also members of their family, So in order to do this, you put a lot of efforts in one case. And if the family, for some reason, has fallen apart, it means your litigation efforts were in vain. So you did a lot of work and didn't succeed, not because the case was weak, but because something happens. Something happened to the family. So we decided to find other similar applicants, other families who cares about the same outcome. And actually Veronika did a good job helping us to get in touch with other wives who wants the same thing. So that's why we had another 3 cases, similar cases. And this is the video rejection of the
Бабушкинский суд Москвы не удовлетворил иск Вероники Королевой, которая пожелала забеременеть от своего пожизненно осужденного мужа. Даме отказали в требовании этапировать ее супруга в другую колонию, оснащенную необходимым оборудованием для проведения искусственного оплодотворения. Подобные процедуры для осужденных пожизненно законом не предусмотрены. Настойчивость Королевой обусловлена тем, что ближайшее длительное свидание, во время которого они с мужем могли бы зачать ребенка естественным путем, состоится лишь в 2020 году, когда обоим будет по 40 лет. Получается, своим решением судья невольно предложила женщине дождать.
А я почему-то только думала, да? Что так будет? Почему? Потому что, наверное, такого решения не было еще в России. Поэтому я думаю, что Бабушкинский суд районный не взял на себя такую ответственность.
Но на этом Королева решила не останавливаться. В ближайшее время она обратится с апелляцией в Московский городской суд, а если потребуется, намерена дойти до Европейского.
В дальнейшем наши планы – это обратиться в Конституционный суд Российской Федерации и обжаловать ту норму Уголовно-исполнительного кодекса, которая вообще запрещает заключенным встречаться с их родственниками в ближайшие минимум 10 лет. Это никак не способствует реабилитации.
Королев, от которого Вероника желает родить ребенка, приговорен к пожизненному лишению свободы за терроризм. В 2006 году он вместе с сообщниками устроил взрыв на Черкизовском рынке в Москве. Тогда погибли 14 человек. Не так давно Королев записал видеообращение, где выступил в поддержку супруги и попросил всем помочь им зачать ребенка.
So again, taking into account the experience that we had with Harkins, we kind of didn't hope for any good outcome in the Russian courts. We had very bad judgment by the Constitutional Court, which says that any lifer may be limited in the possibility of having a child. To think of a district court judge who will go against the judgment of the Constitutional Court, it's insane. So that's why initially our goal was to collect materials for the European Court of Human Rights, to make a very good case, very strong case in every respect, in terms of the substance, the real claim that they have a right to conjugal meetings and the right to artificial insemination, but also to take care of all the procedural requirements. So, like in the Harkins case, this case would be admitted and recognized as admissible. He wrote, pinning the case, he used this word, it's шить дело, да? Только уже in regard of all the judges involved in the case, all the authorities of the prison, we were pinning the case, шили дело против них for the European Court of Human Rights. So the Babushkin District Court referred to this judgment of the Harkins and said, you don't have a right to conjugal meeting because you can be limited in your right to conceive a child, to have a child. In regard to Dixon case, the same picture as with Sablina case. Dixon is not applicable as it is not against Russia but against the UK, and it's based on different circumstances. Of course it's based on different circumstances, different people, different country, different systems, but the principle is the same. That's the point of the case law. You don't apply the same different judgments to a different case. You apply it to a different case because, not because of the circumstances, but because of the principles are similar. And so there was no actual explanation why circumstances are different. It's just a statement by the judge. One piece of a background, Sablina case and Korolev's case were litigated about the same time. This judgment was, the first judgment by the Babushkin District Court was in December 14. Sablina case was litigated at the same time, but the judgment came in April. So it was at the same time. And it's interesting for a lawyer to see this legal arguments going through. Another interesting part of the judgment was the judge said that the punishment given to Nikolai Korolev is just vengeance. But in Russian she wrote, наказание данное Королеву является карой for crimes committed by him. What is kara? Right? It's глаз за глаз, зуб за зуб, вот это вот, да? And in Russian legislation, it's prohibited. Все кары запрещены в российском законодательстве, and it's the same in the European Convention. If we talk about vengeance, it's actually called unusual and cruel punishment, and it's prohibited by Article 3 of the European Convention. This article is called torture. But the judge wrote this. So when we were litigating this, after district court we went to the Moscow City Court, they also referred to this. And all of a sudden we got this Harashenko case. the same guy who in 2005 filed an application to the European Court. And in 10 years, see, it's very slow. We got a very good judgment. This case was not litigated by us, but anyway, it really helped Korolyova. So 17 judges, that's the composition of the Grand Chamber, anonymously decided that the lack of conjugal meetings for the 10 plus years, actually Karashenko didn't have meetings for 15 years, violated Article 8, right to private and family life. And 2 judges wrote a special separate opinion. They agreed with the other 15 judges, but they also said that prohibition of visits for 10 plus years in itself cruel and inhuman treatment and punishment. So this is more or less soft sort of article. It's a right to family life. Inhuman treatment